So I made my first property mistake in 2020. Not a small one. I mean the kind that really cost you something where you only notice it few years later when you saw someone actually collecting their property keys lah. So I bought a BTO at that time. Standard story, you know, you apply, then you got a queue number, then after that you get married. So at that time I was only 25 years old. My wife was only like 24. We thought we were sensible lah, but what I didn't see at the time, right, is like, of course with the family I grew up in, right, like we do real estate investment, all this, it's like, you know, a 10-year decision, right, at that time I only think 5 years ahead only. So actually that's a daily mistake. Also, because at that time the BTO, right, took longer than usual because there's a delay due to COVID lah. So we waited. And of course, people in the same age at the time, right, they purchase like private property or ECs, right, about same household income, same stage of life. They were sitting on something that actually moved more, that means earn more based on the property and profit margin in the same period of time. So by the time, right, my keys came, right, the gap between what I thought I bought and what they bought wasn't just a few $1,000 difference. It's actually like, wow, it makes a big difference in that few years, at least a 6-figure profit margin difference. That is like equivalent to a small flat. So I signed my OTP for my BTO around 2020, collect my keys last year, late 2025, and of course, you know, my parents, right, when I told them, right, they didn't really say much. They just tell me one sentence only. Told you already. Because I thought I was supposed to figure it out myself, because at the time I was, you know, 25 years old, and then, you know, just based on what resources, based on what capital we have, we probably only can just get a BTO. But actually, right, there's other ways lah. You also can borrow, you know, for family. So that's something I should have thought it through carefully lah. Yeah, that's actually one of the big regret lah. So the reason I tell you this, right, this story today, right, is like 5 years plus lah. Okay lah. After I should have made a different decision, is that because at the time on the 8th of May, right, 2026, which is just a few days ago, right, the rules for the ECs actually changed. So the version of me from 2020 would today be more in trouble lah. So this video, right, is for anyone, right, that is standing where I was standing, right. So the question is no longer just whether you should just buy an EC or just a private launch. It's whether the math, right, that actually made an EC an obvious choice for Singapore upgraders, right, still works under the new rules or not. So spoiler, right, actually it doesn't. Not the way it used to, but I don't think it will impact the price in the long run much. People is just going to get used to it. So I'm going to show you, right, why in numbers, right. So 4 things have changed for these ECs. Yeah, it's actually for the ones that the land tender, right, actually comes after the 8th of May onwards. So the 4 changes that took effect on 8th of May 2026, right. One is, right, MOP doubled. Yeah, quite sad. 5 become 10. Wow, solid really. 5 become 10, jialat already. Yeah, from the TOP lah. So for the TOP, you know. So and then during those 10 years, right, you can't sell, you can't rent out, and of course you can't buy another property. Yeah, it's just not just a longer wait, you know. It's actually 10 years of like lock-up capital and no portfolio flexibility. To me, Number 2, right, is full privatization pushback lah. So of course MOP you push back to 10 years. Then of course private you probably just another 5 more lor. That means you have to wait until 15 years after the TOP to privatize. Yeah, which then you can sell to foreigners, and then that's where your buyer pool widens beyond like Singapore citizens, PRs, and then the moment shift from the 15 year onwards lah. So yeah, it's quite long lah. And then the price uplift, right, that comes with the foreigner eligibility, right, now of course arrive later also. And number 3, first timer, right, properties got dramatically stronger. It's actually good news for first timer, means they got higher chance to get it. So quota is up from 70% to 90%. So the priority windows, right, stretch from 1 month to 2 years. So if you are a first timer, your odds of getting the unit you want, right, at the launch, right, actually went up lah. Good news for first timer. Number 4, deferred payment scheme is gone. So all buyers, right, must follow the progressive payment, same as the private lah. Same cash flow profile as a private new launch during the construction, and we will come back to what that does to the IRR. First timer change is policy is doing what the policy is supposed to do lah. So it's supposed to help young couples buy their first home. Okay, fine. But the 10-year MOP, right, the privatization push, right, to the year 15, right, wow, and the loss of the DPS, right, those 3 numbers like really change the math of an EC, a financial product. Yeah, they don't just like stretch the timeline, you know, they really compress what you call the returns. And I'm going to show you exactly what I meant, like side by side, and then we are going to talk about what it means for upgraders and what it means for investors, because the answer is not the same. One thing first, there are still like ECs, right, in the immediate pipeline, right, whose land was tendered before 8th of May, and then the current launch wave also comprises Coastal Cabana, Rivelle at Tampines, Otto Place, and then the next batch coming through the 2026, of course, and 2027 is like around like Senja Close in Bukit Panjang, the 2 Sim Lim sites, yeah, Sembawang Road, and also close to Yishun, there's one more. These are all still under the old rules lah. The 5-year MOP DPS eligible for some, 8 in total, I think plus minus around there. So hold that fact, we'll come back to it. Okay, this is what I want. Same buyer profile, HDB upgraded a couple, combined household income around like 14,000 a month. So 2 kids like around sitting on a flat that actually clears MOP. So we call them the Tans, okay, the Tans family. Okay, the Tans, right, have like example 3 options: pipeline EC under old rules, new ECs under new rules, or private new launch. So 3 different products, 3 different timelines, 3 very different return portfolio or profiles, you can call that. So numbers, right, are just for illustrative purpose, okay, not guaranteed. So past performance also doesn't guarantee future results. Okay, this isn't a tax or legal advice. So if you're actually working through like ABSD on second property, right, then you have to really speak to your advisor before you go through with that. And of course, here we go. There are actually 2 ways, right, to measure on a return for a property, and most people only know the first one: total profits. So example, you buy at 1.5 million, you sell at 2.2, you know, that's like $700,000 done. Yeah, most people are just calculate that. Annualized return. So how much your money make, right, per year factors in how long it was actually tied up and when it tied up. So this is where the new EC math, right, falls apart. You know what's called CAGR, compound annual growth rate. Yeah. So let's take the start price, okay, and the end price, then work backwards to the per year rate, right? Yeah, useful, right? But it ignores when you actually like paid the money. So in IRR, right, internal rate of returns. So factors is the timing of every dollar. So deferred payment under the DPS, okay, your IRR, right, runs higher than your CAGR. So you deploy capital earlier, your IRR drops. So for a property, right, where the payment scheme, right, matters as much as the appreciation, right, the IRR is actually the truth, right? Okay, let's run all 3 of them. Okay, scenario A, what we call the old rule for the EC lah. Okay, 3-bedroom units, 1.5 million entry lah. Okay, DPS available, 20% down at booking. Okay, 80% deferred to TOP at the 4th year and the 5th year MOP. Earlier sale at the year number 9 from booking. Okay, appreciation 5% per year. Let's say lah, that's roughly like what an average EC average appreciated over the last 2 MOPs lah, cycles based on the URA caveat data lah. Yeah, so anchoring that number lah, around 5% lah. So sales price at example the number 9 year lah, around like 2.2 million. Net of cost about 2.17 lah, plus minus let's say lah. So you profit around like 672,000 over the 9 years, let's say. So CAGR, right, 4.2%. IRR 6.5%. So notice the gap, the 2.3% point, right? The gap is actually the value of the DPS. So your money, right, was tied up for like around 5 years, not 9. The other 4, right, the bank's money, right, was actually doing the work lah. That's the version of an EC, right, that's built under that really built the upgraders' wealth in Singapore for the last two decades. So it's also the version that just got switched off for every new sites, right, that's tendered after 8th of May, sadly. So scenario B, new rule EC, example for a 3-bedroom, 1.6 million NPS only lah. So it's like progressive payment over the 4 years, and then of course the earliest years on the number after your MOP lah, 10 year onwards lah, from booking lah. Appreciation assumption lah, around like 4%, not 5. 3 reasons. 1, so the buyer pool, right, during the year 6 to 10, right, is actually smaller lah. Yeah, depends on how you see it. So like, because nowadays foreigners got ABSD ma. So with privatisation, right, pushed to actually like year 15, right, you have added like 5 more years where the unit can only be sold to citizens or PR. So thinner uplift lah. Number 2, so with DPS gone, right, which deferred payment scheme lah, headline launches, right, prices likely to soften. So Promnex notes that, right, the DPS adoption hit around 60 to 70% on some launches lah, with a 2 to 3% premium price baked in. So you strip that out, right, the absolute gap between the privates actually narrows. So private makes more sense due to less room. Yeah. Number 3, 14 years, right, hold dilutes the percentage. Same dollar profit, more years, lower per year rate. Yeah. And also 4% conservative lah. Maybe you want to sell at the number 14 year lah. So around like 2.66 million or net 2.61 million. So profit, like example, 1,011,000 over 14 years, let's say. So the CAGR, right, the 3.56%, right, and the IRR, right, the 4.37%. So look at that. The total profit, right, is actually bigger. Wow, lucky, right? But the thing is, right, a million, right, beats the $672,000. So most upgraders, right, look at the headline and will say that, hey, the new EC, right, no, you got more profit. But actually, no, the IRR, right, dropped from 6.6 to actually around to 4.4. That's like a whole 2.2 of compounding gone. Put the same equity into the like diversified like REITs portfolio over the same period, like you get similar results. And then for the global equity, right, index funds, right, you actually will do even much better. So the new EC, right, as a financial product no longer like obviously have superior to the alternatives. So that's the headline and that's the argument. Yeah, so also let me show you the top option that also a lot of investors are actually looking into, and something that I love to go into. Scenario number C, private new launch. The flexibility is really there. So example, a 3-bedroom, right, OCR, 2 million, let's say. MPS, progressive payment, no MOP, 3 years, no, now it's a 4 years SSD, and sellable to anyone, foreigners if they want to pay the ABSD, of course. Included on day 1 of the 4 years. Same 4% appreciation assumption, let's say. So 2 paths, right? Example, you short hold and long hold. We talk about the short flip. So sell, example, you want to sell the 6 year. Okay, sale price around like 2.43 million, so net around like 2.37, let's say. So you profit around like 372,000 over 6 years. The CAGR, right, the 2.9%, right, and the IRR, right, the 5.9%. So long, right, okay, let's say you long hold same property, right, 14, let's say if you hold 14 years, okay, we compare apple to apple for the new EC sales price 3.33 million and net 3.25. Profit around like 1.25 million over the 14 years. The CAGR 3.5% and the IRR 4.5%. Here's what matters in the last comparison. New ECs, right, like over 14 years, right, the IRR is about 4.37. Private new launch over the same 14 years, right, is about 4.51. Almost identical already. That means what? Buy both also same but the difference is private got more flexibility Yeah. And then of course the ECs, right, the EC's 20% purchase discount, right, the reason is like its structure is because I'm going to pick over a private is because usually, right, it's get fully eaten up by the longer lockup period and also the loss of DPS. So the math, right, that make an EC, right, an obvious choice, right, it's not the math of the new ECs really. That means the old ECs, right, is really a steal and now the new EC rules change everything really. So in summary, right, 4 numbers across the bottom, right, the old EC, right, the old rule EC, the IRR, right, 6.5. The new EC, right, IRR is about 4.4. Private, right, 6 years hold, right, IRR is about 6.9. And then private 14-year hold, right, IRR is about 4.5. So the new EC has the worst IRR on the board not by a small margin. That's not because not because ECs are bad it's because the new rules have removed the 2 structural advantage, DPS and also the 5 years MOP, that make the EC IRR, right, superior to the private in the first place. So they removed that, and of course now private looks more attractive to say. So pros and cons, the IRR isn't the whole story So for genuine upgraders, right, this you can still consider but the pros, right, still a private style home at a meaningful discount. That's what I say. With a 90% first timer quota, right, you have a higher chance to get it And also with the 2 years priorities, your odds of getting the unit you want, right, are better than ever. Owner-occupier, right, its focus is on the entire part of the policy Cons, right, is the cash flow stress during the 4-year build up, right? No DPS to actually soften it. So you either have the dual mortgage or actually ran through the construction pure investors So pros, right, is that none that survive the contact with the IRR table. Okay. Cons is that 16 years to full privatization, right? Capital efficiency is worse than the private So no flip, smaller buyer pool through the entire MOP window. And for investors, right, the new EC is actually roughly off the table So here's the part that Singapore property agents don't really usually say. So the new rule EC, right, is not for investors. It's actually for owner-occupiers who can hold for a generation. That's a fine product, right? For specific buyers not just a product that the EC scheme used to be really. So I keep coming back, right, to that question, right? Like my parents asked me like, why didn't you like think about it more, consult them more about it lah. So the mistake I made in like 2020, right, wasn't just buying the wrong product. I mean, BTO is actually a fine product lah for a lot of people lah, for a lot of buyers lah. I mean, definitely lah, it's like almost guaranteed earn money lah. But it's just the flexibility is not there, and also because of the COVID delay, that is, something that I did not consider at the time. In fact, a lot of people didn't consider that there's a huge delay at the time lah. Or did I? I can't remember. Yeah, so a 5 years like lockup, right, that turned into longer because of construction, right? So in the market that was moving without me, and then of course there's no IRR conversation in my head at the time, and no one had ever shown me. So I was treating property as a place to live. Okay, partially as investment. It's just that I thought that it's guaranteed. Then why think so hard? I should have thought through more lah. So I should treat this like 10 years, like I'll say 10 years. Okay lah, 10 years lah, capital allocation lah. So today, right, if you are standing where I was standing, right, you have more information than I had at the time, right? Like you should also have one more decision in front of you. It's just that the EC map has just changed, So if you really want to think this through with me, right, I'm just one call away. I've been through this, so I actually know what is actually going on. And sometimes I also run these scenarios with my clients, like on real units, not hypothetical one. So the link is actually in the description. So actually, I just wish, right, someone really had run it with me at that time. I mean, my family did mention it, but we never really go in depth into it. So that's some regret that I had. So 2 more things before I wrap up. The market implications. So the current pipeline, right, is actually the old rule. Like anything that is tendered before the 8th of May, right, follows the 5-year MOP. And with the DPS available for some launches, right, that's the 8 or so project we will come back into like in a moment. So the new rule sites, right, are the ones, right, being tendered now throughout 2026 into 2027. The NND has signaled more ECGLS sites coming up. So we'll see the first launches under the new 10-year MOP probably in the late 2027 or into 2028. So 2 things to watch, right, when those launches arrive. So number 1, headline launches, right, likely to soften 2 to 3%. So without the DPS premium price back in, we see the prices actually, I think, soften down a bit lah. Number 2, so take-up rate might be slower at launch because the buyers who have actually stretched into EC using DPS now cannot actually do that. So some shift to resale EC, still under the old rules, some to the private new launches, some sit out. Okay, so the first new rule EC launch, right, will actually set the tone for the next decade. So watch it carefully. So final verdict, right, is like 2 answers. Like if you're an upgrader who wants the EC subsidized economics with the IRR that used to come with them, the 8 remaining ECs, right, whose land was tendered before the 8th of May are the last batch under the old rules. The current launch wave at Coastal Cabana, Rivelle, Tampines, Otto Place, and then the next batch that is coming through the late 2026 and 2027 like Senja at Bukit Panjang, from CDL, the 2 sim lands at Woodlands, Sembawang Road, and then the one at the Yishun from Hoi Hub. After this batch, right, the EC scheme will grow up, right, understanding, right, stop existing in the primary market already forever lah. If you have cash flow and the financing and the headroom and the appetite to treat property as an investment, a private new launch holds its own against the new EC like over the 14 years period, and pretty badly, because of the flexibility you had if you want to sell after your SSD, with caveats like ABSD on the second property, execution risk, and then of course the structural math, right, no longer favors the new rule EC lah. So the mistake I made in 2020, right, was treating this product as interchangeable. They are not. Oh my god, same market, different products, different IRRs. Before I let you go, subscribe if you want more of these. In the comment, tell me which of the 8 ECs you're considering, or maybe new launch projects that you're interested in, because I have a list that for investors that really worth considering. If I have the money, I will invest in. And if there's a project you want me to run the numbers on, drop me the name, and of course I can pick one this week to meet you up for that. So I'm Elson, 3rd generation of property family. I help people think about properties the way I wish I've been thinking on in 2020 lah. So see you in the next video.